Hello again. We are now working on section 15 in our ASP.NET MVC tutorials. The topic for this section is databases. And this is actually something we've kind of been building up to, which is true in a lot of application development. Because real applications, I always like to think, are data-driven, and data-driven applications tend to store their data in databases. Whether they're created code first or they're pre-created, regardless, that I think is always a key thing to keep in the back of your head. And I don't know, for me, I always kind of think, when I think applications and I think of like a real application, I almost kind of don't think it's real until there's a database attached to it. And I notice that the author's kind of saying the same thing. And the reason for that, very simply, is because as a data source, a database really exists independently of the application, right? And in many ways is an application all unto itself, especially if you start writing stored procedures and really complicated SQL scripts with a lot of, relationships and things like that. The tool that we have in the .NET framework that really helps to drive this is the one that they're pointing out right on the screen right now, which is this thing called the Entity Framework. And keep in mind that it is a framework, so it's kind of an approach, basically, if you will, for interconnecting things. And notice that it does support a code-first technique, okay? So kind of like what we did where we set up C# files that imply a structure, kind of like the way SQL code implies a structure, really, and then uses that to actually build it. So why don't we go ahead, let's move off to the second screen here once again. I'm trying to rearrange all my windows. Sometimes I think I need to go up to 3 screens. Thank you for nodding your head. It makes me feel better. It doesn't make me feel like an excessive American, just like a practical person, because I really kind of use that much screen real estate when I do stuff. But it's kind of hard to lug all that stuff around. We have 2 screens here in the classroom. I suppose I have 3. All right, let's go ahead and jump on step 1. In step 1, they want us, and I'm assuming we're still working on the same application, right? Because I see on the screen here it says MVC Simple App right there. So I still have that open in Visual Studio. No reason to go away from that. And I'm going to right-click on the source solution file, or the root of our project, so to speak. And they want us to actually add, from the package manager, some new stuff. So find your NuGet package manager. And I do also want to point out, because this is written around, I think, Visual Studio 2015, this tutorial, which is pretty modern, right? But are you noticing that right below where I'm hovering with my mouse, how Visual Studio 2017 has another package manager that they've added in? And I have experimented with it just a tiny little bit, and I'm not going to delve there right now because you're pointing out the NuGet package manager. But when Microsoft is boldly adding it to their product like this, I think that you can kind of tell that this is kind of a future thing, and that maybe there's something superior about this other package manager that might sway us to go that direction in the future. We'll see. So go ahead and click on that and move on down to page 116. Brings up the package manager. Now, the package manager that's in the tutorial is the old school look for it, right? So this is the way it kind of looked back then. And this really isn't all too much different, but it's slightly updated. Now, we do want to find the entity framework. So the best way to find it, honestly, is first to make sure that you type it correctly. So it's entity framework, but now I'm noticing that I'm typing this in. Of course, it's not going to find it because I don't have it installed. We're in the installed area. So I'm going to go to Browse, and of course, it'll find it immediately. All right. Yes. This is a very, very popular framework. It looks like it's maybe 1 version higher. In the book, it's 6.1.2. And we're on 6.20, which is a stable release. You always want to use the stable releases when you're building things, folks. Not that we're pushing the bounds of new features, but just sage advice, honestly. All right. Give you a little preview in the box here. Go ahead and say OK. Yes, there's a license that goes with it. Thank you, Microsoft. Like I have a choice to decline, especially if I want to get my homework done. And notice on the bottom screen, I like that they still show the console output. And just a reminder, in the old days when we would add packages in Visual Studio, we had to like actually run the console. You know, and in some ways, honestly, I kind of liked it better because if you knew the commands, it's like boom, boom, boom. Otherwise, you'd be out on the line researching them. And really, all the package manager is it pulls from a collection, a database somewhere online, and pulls it directly into our tool here. All right, so we are now on page, well onto page, I guess 118. Well, that was fast. All right, and they make a point here, make sure that you're successfully installed. Okay, bottom of page 118 now. It says we need to add another class to the employee model, and it says this will communicate with Entity Framework to retrieve and save the data using the following code. So that we're going to find, we're in the models folder, and we're working with the employee model. So that's what they're referring to. So it's not like mysterious. So where's the employee model? Well, it's in the models folder. There's only one, right? It's kind of process of elimination. But we do need to add a few things. And I'm noticing right off the bat that there's, first of all, a library we have to add. You guys noticing that? So let's go ahead and just drop that in. And yeah, you can do it manually, or you can type the rest of the code and it will imply that you need to add it. And I'm dropping it into the same spot where the book has it. Not that you have to, its order is irrelevant. All right, and then I'm scrolling down and I'm checking that my employee class, that one we're not touching, right? So we have our ID, our name, our joining date, and our age. That stays untouched. But we are going to add another class inside of here. And I'm just copy pasting from the PDF now, if you're wondering. Where did he go? And I went right there. They add actually a little bit of space here in between so you can add your code. All right. And then I want you to notice here that we're implying, you know, that we're doing database stuff here, absolutely, because we're starting to name things in that way. And then notice that here we are extending the database context library, which is a system library, which is why we needed that statement up above. Now, because we're going to start working with a database, and my Java 2 students, you know, and I know a lot of you guys are taking that class along with this one, or maybe you're taking it at separate times. But whenever you're working with a database, a big aspect of database is setting up connection strings so that your application can talk to your database consistently. So we need to actually go to our web config file. And in our web config file, we need to actually add connection strings for all this stuff to work. And you know what? I'm taking a look at my web config file. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right file here. So I'm looking at all the default stuff that's already in here. Notice that way at the bottom of the web config file, you guys noticing this? We added that package. And now we have the entity framework and all that stuff added in here. And that was done automatically. Notice that what that does is it pulls in a bunch of different like SQL tools and stuff. And if you make a comparison to other languages, how some of that stuff where we get, you know, think of like when you're working with Java, we'll pull in like the MySQL connector libraries, right? Which is kind of like pulling in the NuGet package. And then by tying it into the project, it automatically registers itself. And we don't usually see that in a Java project, but we still have to work on the connection strings. So what I'm going to do with the connection string is I'm going to add it right below the entity framework here. And I'm just going to copy the stuff that is in the book. So copy and paste. And then I'll tell you from experience, when I do stuff like this, I'm sometimes a little bit leery of copying in connection strings, especially when the versions of Visual Studio start to change. Because sometimes some of these names change as well and version numbers change. I'm happy to say that it doesn't seem to be the case here. It pasted in beautifully with no underlines or anything like that. Now, notice really carefully as you add the connection string in, and I don't know if he really talks about it much here. I guess I'm not really reading what he's saying. But notice the connection string, the actual connection string. The data source. What's our data source? Local database. And what does that mean? It's also indicating the name of the database file right here. And where is that going? Wherever the default is for the application, the data directory that's default. And notice it picks up a lot of stuff automatically, thankfully because he coded it for us. But there is some of this being generated here automatically. All right, next thing that we need to do is we need to go back to our controller file, make sure this is saved. And I'm noticing that my employee.cs file wasn't saved here, so I'm saving that one too. But back over to the controller. All right, and the point of coming back over to the controller is now we're going to be pulling in stuff from the database instead of using all that hard-coded stuff that we already had provided in here. You guys remember that? All right, so let's first, and I'm trying to follow his directions here, so excuse me if I sound a little scattered, because sometimes he puts in steps, he numbers them, and then sometimes he doesn't, and it kind of bugs me in the tutorial. Just a little, pet peeve. But at the very bottom of page 119 is where I'm reading from right now, so if you want to see where that is, and I highlighted it. And he's saying, first we add and create a private employee DB context class object and update the index, create an edit action methods as shown in the following code. So here's one of these where it's really helpful to have two screens, or you can, of course you can do the Windows trick where you split the screens, and I was just doing that, but I'm not on the wrong screen, of course. But whatever it takes for you to be able to have these side by side so you can make the changes in the way that's necessary. So I'm looking very carefully at the stuff I have, and I'm just going line by line, section by section. All right. First thing I'm noticing, and he does mention this in the writing, that way up here on a global level, he's adding a private object here. So notice we're calling it employee database context, and we're giving it a name of database, and it's a new object being created on the fly. The action result index looks to me to be slightly changed. Now, here's where the change is. So instead of pulling it in from emp list, which is pulling from that pre-configured stuff, here's where we start to make some changes. So because we called it DB up here, that's going to pull it, every time we use that DB, it's going to pull it into whatever we're doing. So we're replacing here, we're taking DB dot, and it should find employees down here. And where is that pulling it in from? See if you guys are catching this. It's pulling it in from the models. That's where that's coming from. So we're pulling that in directly. Order by stays the same, select stays the same, and the return view stays the same. Now their stuff is in a slightly different order than mine. In the PDF, the employee create is next. That stays unchanged. So we might have to do a little bit of jumping around here. And then there's the employee create post. And we have a little bit of work to do in here. So in the HTTP post for employee create, we're going to be changing out this little thing that we added. And what we're doing is we're substituting that new terminology. So I'm just kind of backspacing a little bit of space out of here. And what we're typing in is DB dot employees dot add, and then what we're throwing in is what we're passing from the parameters above, which is emp for employee. Add your semicolon at the end here, jump down to the next line, and then we also have to tell it, this is kind of interesting, this is just a beautifully simple little method called save changes. So we're going to add something, and then we're going to save the changes. So see how that works? Pretty simplistic, really. Yeah, it doesn't seem simplistic when you're working on it, right? All right, the catch part of it stays the same. Then we're moving down to the edit method. And this one also changes. So anywhere we were doing all this like complicated stuff, you're going to see that the statements are going to simplify slightly, but really what we're doing overall is going to look basically the same. First of all, the list is going to go away. So I'm deleting the list. And yes, I'm going to get rid of that extra line. We're still declaring a variable called employee, but instead of pulling from emp list, I think you guys are probably catching the pattern here now. We're just pulling it in from the database dot employees, plural. And then the rest of it stays the same. And since we kept the same variable name, we don't have to change any of that. Moving down to the post version of it, there's a couple of edits that we have to do here as well. Same thing. We're getting rid of emp list. And instead we're doing db.employees. And kind of like the sage advice here is let the IntelliSense do the work. You know why? Because you don't make mistakes, right? And working with the IntelliSense here in Visual Studio, it really makes me appreciate how well it works. Because I've been like working with Eclipse all day long in my Java 1 and Java 2 class, and it's been really sluggish lately. And I don't know if it's my Java configuration that's doing it or what, but I'm guessing that might be the case. But this one really works pretty well. So down here in the if statement, where previously we just had a return, we do need to add to this that db save changes thing. So just add that in, put in your parens and your semicolon. All right. And then, from what I'm guessing here, all the other stuff is superfluous. Are you guys catching this? So now I'm going back up to the top. So just so you see what I'm doing, I'm going back up to the top here. I need to make that full screen. I'm just going to pull it off to the side, and then I'm going to, because my mouse allows me to do this on this machine, I'm going to side by side, as you guys are watching, to see if I have all the same stuff in place. All right, so my index method seems good, and I'm asking you guys to kind of be my second set of eyes here too, I guess, indirectly. Now, are you guys noticing that the details view isn't in here? Yeah, I'm not seeing it in here. Will it hurt to leave it? No, it won't hurt to leave it. But you know what? I'm going to make a little note here to myself, because just in case. This is how you use comments, folks. If you don't use them, you should. All right, so I'm going to leave that one alone, but I noted it to myself that, maybe that should go away. Going on to the create method again, we have the simple version, which just returns the view. And then we have the post, which sends the data. We change these. That looks okay. The catch part just returns the view, so we're good. Moving on to the edit. We pull in, we change that statement. That looks fine. Return the view. Then we're on to the post. The parameters are identical. The line changed in the same way. We put in our save changes here. Return the view. And then, guess what, folks? Looks like all the rest can maybe go away. Now, I'm a little worried about actually removing delete. I don't know if that's necessary, right? But certainly the part that we do want to remove down here, is the stuff that's all hard-coded. That's it for sure. So I'm scrolling. I'm grabbing both the static version and the other one, the original one. And then that's all gone. I left delete and I left details. And I'm hoping you're trying the same thing. Worst thing that'll happen, of course, doesn't work. And I don't think that's going to be the case. All right. So now they have us to the point where we're running. So I'm moving my PDF back over to the other screen. I'm doing a Control-S to save my work. In fact, not a bad idea to maybe do a save all at this point, just in case I missed something. Go ahead and run the application. Of course, we're going to run the employee URL again. So if it goes to root and throws an error, we know to type it in. There's employee. Mine's taking a long time, yep. Now, when it takes a long time like this and it's not loading up, it does trigger some doubts in my mind about some of the edits that we made. And I'm seeing that actually I'm kind of watching a little progress meter in the background. We'll just wait. Everybody's still waiting? See whose machine is faster or slower. All right. Now, mine's throwing an exception. Are you guys getting an exception? Yeah. So we actually have a little bit of an issue here. And this is how this happens, right? We run into the issue at what point in their class? Minutes before class ends. But you know what? This is actually not a bad spot to stop because this is where the work is getting real. Now, it is throwing an exception, and if you guys actually read this exception, it says a network-related or instance-specific error occurred to establish a connection to SQL Server. Okay, what are we assuming? We're assuming that we're connecting to a database. All right. And it's not being found, so the specified local database does not exist. Now, when you see this, that does not necessarily mean that you need to run SQL Server. All right? All right, so we're going to revisit this next week, folks. So if you get this far, this is good. I will have due dates adjusted accordingly for this, so don't freak out. Get this far in this one so at least you get started. And then we'll pick up next week, and I will see you guys then.